place for civil society is shrinking, as Daniel Erickson said previously. And of course, it's true. And nowadays, there are not a lot of loud voices of Russian civil societies could be heard globally. That's why I'm much appreciated for this opportunity to talk with you and share my thoughts. As a citizen of country, and the country is involved in aggression against the brotherly people in the neighboring country, I want to apologize to the Ukrainian and the international community for what is happening in Ukraine now. And we can talk for a while about what we had to do to prevent what happened and what we were able to do. I think that opportunities were missed, and the challenge facing entire world community concerns not only the need to stop the war, but also to prevent a domino effect in other countries. And one of the issues that was a trigger of these processes was expanding and the big flows of dirty money in irresponsible politics as well. And dirty money coming from Russia and the other kleptocracy regimes are destroying the ethical system of large corporations. Dirty money forced to turn a blind eye to the unacceptable approaches of the consultants and auditors. Using dirty money, they bribed Western legal professionals who rushed to defend Russian oligarchs in British courts from the truthful publication in media. And dirty money from Russia has filled Europe, Asia, Africa, America, and Australia. The oligarchs from Russia and the kleptocrats stole not only national resources in industry in my country, but also the future of our children, the future of Russia. We can talk a lot about what can be done now, but from my perspective, and my perspective is that there are hundreds of Russian civil society organizations, they relocate to other countries just because of the shrinking space for civil society, and there's no way to continue their work in Russia. And hundreds of journalists and amazing media outlets say they were shut down just because of they cannot continue their work in current Russia. And what can be done now? I think that we can ensure transparency of corporate structures around the world to prevent anonymity of being used as a tool to hide dirty money. Just because it's very obvious way to stop dirty money flows. And I think that ultimate beneficiaries of companies and properties must be disclosed. Journalists and non-profits organizations should have access to this information. And what about civil society in Russia? I think that civil society and independent media in Russia are practically destroyed now. Those few representatives of civil society and media who were not closed or stopped their work, they need support, at least not less than the citizens of Ukraine now. If you want to change something in Russia, then this can be only one way. This way is enlightenment. And I think that this way we can have to do. And also, I would like to focus on the people who did a lot of irresponsibility moves or actions. I mean, the intermediaries. We can enforce intermediaries to comply with ethical standards. Lawyers, auditors, accountants, and bankers not only can, but must be accountable to regulators and civil society. It was not only Putin who started this war, but also the intermediaries who helped launder the money of the kleptocrats and cleaning oligarchs' reputation, who for decades helped to ensure warmongers get impunity. That's my perspective of the current situation in Russia, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss it with you and to share my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Ilya, for sharing with us. And I think it's really important to note that what we are seeing today is really a result of a longer term situation in Russia, also with civil society, and also with tolerating some of the untransparent ways of governance, which and money flows. And I think it's really important that as we look forward, we try to address all of these issues in a kind of more contextualized but also comprehensive manner. We will be talking in a moment about the issues that you've raised, that civil society and the rapporteur raised about what civil society is facing and how we can address that through the G7. But before we do that, we wanted to take a step back and just take a moment to look at the priorities of the G7 government. And indeed, the issue of open societies, the issue of civic space are there on their agenda. But there is one element, one issue which they're also saying, which we wanted to pick up on and we wanted to highlight and bring to much up on the front lines. The German government says that its aim is to achieve the most coordinated action possible on shared democratic values, universal human rights, and fair rule-based multilateralism. They then highlight that proactive dialogue and cooperation within and beyond G7 is essential, including one with civil society. Why is this important that the G7 is saying and the German government is leading? I think in the moment of time where we are now, there are three reasons I would like to highlight. First of all, as democracies and societies, we are facing global threats: climate, health, security, emergency powers, technology, and war. But these challenges cannot be addressed alone. They can only be addressed to those that are part of those that cause them, but also those that want to be part of the solution and are affected. We have technological companies which develop fast-forward technology without consideration of impact on rights. We have extractive industries which in some ways also destroy land and attack individual communities. We have banks who have, for various reasons, justified and sometimes from overcautiousness, impede money flows. And we have governments who crack down on civil society. And only together we can resolve the issues. We can have a real critical review and say how this should be done. Then the dialogue is also important because it means reaching out to those people who are affected by these developments and who want to be part of the solution. It's the influencers who drive agendas, who speak to the public and who mobilize movements. And only by hearing them, we can bring some of those solutions and identify the real priority needs. And finally, I think the most powerful reason why we need to look at this statement and commitment by the G7 is because as we are facing all these challenges, indeed, our democracies and open societies are at threat. And the message to Russia and to all the other authoritarian countries needs to be very clear. We stand for democratic values. We will nurture them. And even when there is a dissent, we will be speaking together. We'll be working together because the collective power is the one that is the baseline of how we want to move forward. And so if you agree with me with the Open Society Working Group, we were thinking, well, how can we make this a practice? And how can we make sure that it really happens? And this is why, as you will hear later today and tomorrow with the C7, we are proposing an establishment of a task force or a group of experts, not just civil society, but all of those who are part of the democratic developments of the challenges that we're facing, to sit together and to talk. What are the priorities that the G7 countries need to face in order to address the democratic deficit and what we face as a threat to our open societies? How can we monitor those and how can we work to prioritize those actions? We have many asks, but this group can really help us think through, filter, and help us come up with the recommendations that we want to take forward as a G7 and bring to other fora to make sure that they become a solution and they help build our democracies. We can bring climate activists who can speak about what does it mean to address a climate change, what kind of challenges they're facing, and why the climate solution that the G7 is trying to enforce cannot happen without participation and consideration of the freedoms that come with it, for example. So we really are talking not about yet another institution, but really just bringing together a more institutional dialogue that can work together with the G7 towards our forward agenda. And so with this ask, we are really very much looking forward to hearing your opinions and knowing whether it is really something that we should be thinking about, why G7 should be doing it, and how can we take it and convince the governments of the G7 to show leadership by bringing the dialogue higher up on the agenda and really truly showing what it means. And with this, I would like to invite our colleague, Rowan Popperwell from Bond, who were actually initiating discussion on open society last year as part of the UK government. and who can share her views about how this fits within the overall drives of where we're going as societies. Thank you, Rowan.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Great, thank you. So my name is Rowan Popperwell, and I work for Bond, which is the UK network for organisations working in international development. And we were delighted to be the chair of the C7 last year when it was hosted by the UK. And I helped coordinate advocacy towards the UK government as the host of the G7 on open societies and civic space. And I'd like to thank you for inviting me to reflect on the progress that we made last year and say something about how this year's G7 can improve on this. So the main success that we had last year was the Carbus Bay Open Societies statement, and we were delighted that the G7 agreed this, as it's the first time that such a statement had been produced. The statement outlined the values that bind the G7 nations together, including human rights and democracy and freedom of assembly, but it also stressed the importance of civic space and partnership with civil society. And importantly, it made a commitment to strengthen open societies globally by protecting civic space, media freedom, promoting freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, freedom of religion or belief, and by tackling all forms of discrimination, including racism. I would strongly encourage the German presidency to build on this progress, and I support the call by the C7 this year for both a renewed open society statement and the establishment of a civic space task force. There were two. While we were delighted with the statement and that we managed to get it over the line, there were two real negatives with it. The first was that there were no clear measurable commitments on civic space, and there was also no clear delivery mechanism. And I would urge the German presidency to address these this year. It's really important that any statement must contain clear, measurable and time-bound commitments that will have a positive impact on civic space, and that G7 nations can integrate into their own domestic and foreign policy agendas so that we can track progress at subsequent summits. And some of the commitments that we'd like to see, and I'm sure we'll go into more detail later, are around ensuring civil society participation in multilateral forums, banning the use, export, sale and transfer of surveillance technologies, integrating safeguards into counterterrorism frameworks, and importantly, a G7 action plan to protect human rights defenders. We also really need to think through the mechanisms that will advance this work in between the annual summits. And I think this is why the idea of a civic space task force, which supports dialogue and collaboration between G7 governments, civil society and other stakeholders such as financial institutions, is a really important idea. And I would encourage you to learn from existing multi-stakeholder processes such as the Tri-Sector Group in the UK. I was involved in the establishment of this group over 5 years ago, which has now been replicated in many other countries around the world. And the purpose of this is to help understand the root causes of bank de-risking and other barriers to the transfer of funds to NGOs in high-risk environments, particularly conflict zones. And we're doing a lot of work on Ukraine at the moment right now. And we're making real progress. And I think we really are beginning to understand the root causes of these issues and taking steps to tackle them, such as getting exceptions for humanitarian aid and other transfer of funds to civil society in high-risk environments, in sanctions regimes. So just to conclude, as an alliance of democracies, it's so important that the G7 members take a leading role and catalyse global action on civic space. I think the one other negative that we had last year was at the same time as the G7 was trying to play a leadership, or at the same time the UK was trying to play a leadership role on the international stage, it was taking steps to restrict freedom of assembly here in the UK by placing unprecedented conditions and restrictions on protests. And I think it's impossible for G7 nations to promote civic space overseas successfully while restricting at home. And I would urge all G7 nations to lead by example and commit to undertaking an OECD civic space scan, which will support them to improve civic space in their own countries too, as well as working together to progress civic space overseas. Thank you.
Indeed, you planted the seeds for us to work this year, and we are really grateful. I know it wasn't easy at all, and I'm very happy we have here colleagues from the UK and German government who are also part of that process last year and can help us reflect and do a sort of feasibility check about what we are putting forward and proposing. I want to highlight a few things that you said, which is why we are trying to think of more concrete ways forward. It was the actionable commitments which are measurable. This is really something that is important for accountability, but really for making progress. It's not just about sitting there and looking where we are, but also seeing whether we have achieved what we wanted. And I think we are all inspired by that. You also mentioned the importance of giving example by respecting freedoms and negotiating such processes at home, which many governments, I think, should be also thinking about as we set and move global agendas. And you highlighted few issues in the open society that we should be thinking about and moving forward. And I want to thank you for that. I know we have we have some time, actually, quite good time for discussion. And I would like to first do it in a way in which I will invite you all who spoke until now from the online to also reflect. But first, please give me a moment to ask anybody in the room if they have anything they want to say or reflect on what they heard until now this morning. Okay, I will then maybe also at the same time ask my colleagues from Transparency International to also tell me if there are any interested speakers online that would like to add anything.
No.
We have it also here. Thank you so much. So we can see if there is a raised hand to be done. Yes, maybe Rowan, then I had actually a question for you. I just didn't want to take the floor. We are, I think one of the questions I was asked as we were thinking about this solution was, but there is a C7, why there is a need for a task force? What will be the answer that we will put you on the spot there, what you will help me give?
I think the important thing about a task force is that it provides continuity from summit to summit, whereas the C7 is changes from year to year. What we really need is a mechanism that enables delivery and works with governments to deliver the commitments made at each G7 and advance progress to the next one. And I think that's why a task force is so important, and it enables that ongoing dialogue and that ongoing progress around the commitments made.
Yeah, thank you very much. And indeed, that is something we were hoping to say and to see happening is really that continuity and progress. I also see there is a comment online that, and I would like to read it, that they think, will there be a written version of your statement, Rowan? I think that would be, yes, I hope we can share some of those, but I think also many of the points that Rowan made will be part of the C7 statement tomorrow, which will be launched. So I think we can see them there as well. There was also a comment that we support Rowan's proposal to utilize multi-stakeholder approaches to support national governments in defending civil society space because nation states are not able or not willing to strengthen global governments in this respect. Do you have any reflection on that, Rowan?
I think as I mentioned, we have a multi-stakeholder dialogue in the UK known as the Tri-Sector Group. And one of the real benefits of that has been bringing in financial institutions and having ongoing dialogue with them around financial access for NGOs. And that has made a huge, huge difference. And I think that would be one of the benefits of such a task force, is being able to bring in people that we maybe don't normally talk to, like large global banks who do play a critical role in keeping these channels of the provision of finance open.
Thank you very much. If there are no comments more online?
No.
No. And yes, there is. Sorry. Have panelists seen any shift in the degree of international political commitment to addressing civil society space in the light of the Ukraine crisis? If so, how can this be leveraged and sustained beyond the recommendations you're making today? So have we seen any shift in the degree of international political commitment in addressing civil society? And this, I think, I would, in light of what is happening with Ukraine, and how can we leverage this? And maybe I would let me first ask: does anybody online or in the room have any comments on this? I'm not sure if the special rapporteur is with us still. I cannot see the list, but. I think maybe just I would add here that The reason why I was personally motivated to actually engage with the Open Society Working Group and think about this concrete solution is that first with Afghanistan and now with Ukraine, I realized that while there was a lot of focus on what was happening in the countries, there was not enough focus on how civil society should be helped. In Afghanistan, civil society was left behind. And it was really hard for us as civil society organizations across the world, and I think the OGP here and Maria can also talk about that, had a really hard time working through why they should be equally prioritized as others who were leaving Afghanistan. And I think today, if I was reading all the G7 statements that were issued until the day, and none of them mentioned support to civil society in Ukraine, or Russia, or Belarus, or Moldova, where we see the conflict might escalate. The civil society is becoming a very nice speak, but when it comes to the real crisis, civil society is on the ground, and we can hear today later about how and what they do to really help people. Yet civil society is not taken care of when crisis is happening. And for me, this was the biggest sort of emotional trigger as I was working with our partners there to say, but wait, we need to do more. We need to focus government's attention to also this part of the sector and help them both in times of good and in times of crisis. And I guess this is, I would say, from my personal view, I haven't seen any strong commitment yet, although I have seen, and this is where the light is, a much more awareness about why we are here and how the tolerance of autocracies, autocratic governments, and everything that comes with it has brought us where we are, which the rapporteur spoke very passionately. There is a hand raised, I see there, but I don't see it here. Anna, can you?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, can you please come in? Helena, feel free to come in if you would like to make a statement or share your.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I sort of feel I would like to reinforce one comment which was already made, but sort of disappeared so quickly. I think what we need in these hard times all over the world is really for the civil society to get closer together. This was already mentioned. I mean, every civil society organization has hard times to collect the resources, financial resources to do what they are working for. But there are times where we simply have to stick together. We need to pull together those items put into the focus, which right now at a certain point in time are so crucial. And right now, the civic space, the shrinking civic space in so many countries is so crucial. It's so important. I think if we get this message also across civil society is that there are times where we have to stick back with our individual focus if we want to fight for all of us, for the societies as a whole. So that's why I am so happy to have this focus in this year's C7, and I hope that the G7 governments really understand what it is all about and also think about how they can far more support civil societies in their own countries and internationally.
Thank you very much, Helena. Maria. Maria, sorry, I think you might need to come here to make your comment. And this is Maria Helete from our civil society partner from Ukraine, coming and joining us. Thank you, Maria.
I think actually what we missed for many years from G7, it is focus on security. Because we always think that security is something different from civil society. But what we face in Ukraine today, that actually civil society and environment for civil society depends on security. The war significantly affected the environment for civil society because during the martial law, a lot of freedoms are restricted. Civil society could not have peaceful assemblies. Civil society could not freely move from the country. Many men are not allowed to leave the country. Civil society could not do a lot of things. Also, for example, we have some limitations for funding abroad, for transferring funds abroad because of the war. And many more limitations can be expected if the situation deteriorates. Therefore, we have to include security, not because as a security, but security is also important for democracy, for human rights, and for civic space for civil society.
Thank you, Maria. We have actually a couple of minutes. I wanna ask you something about that, because indeed security was one of the priorities of the G7, but not within the context of what it means for civil society. But we were together actually on a panel with the other rapporteur on counterterrorism yesterday, when we were hearing how security is then misused to the effect to attack civil society. How would you find the balance? What is important to think about when we talk about, but for your security, we need to limit these freedoms?
It is a very tough question. It's very tough because, for example, today in Ukraine, civil society accept that their freedoms are limited. They understand that we have a war, we have to fight, and it is a problem that the same was during COVID. Many people accepted limitations because of health, now because of war. I think it's very important to have these fundamentals, rights and freedoms. We have, for example, constitution, and I know that in many countries all the rights fixed in constitution, and we should not we should not limit the rights more than it's necessary. For example, even in Ukraine, I do believe that the limitation of movement for men, outside the country, is not very necessary, because a lot of people who wanted to join the army, they did it. A lot of not only men but also women joined the army, and they are professionally fighting for the country. At the same time, we have a lot of people who are doing other stuff. For example, IT guy, civil society guy who advocating for support to Ukraine. And these people should have chance to go and to do their work. And it is necessary to look whether it is really important to restrict this right or not. And I understand always there will be some manipulation, but the country should not do just prohibit it for everybody and and close the space for any steps, any work.
Thank you so much. And indeed, I think we should recognize that the German government in its priorities has thankfully and rightfully focusing on this year has been saying that it would like to focus from the perspective of security, but also balancing the fundamental rights of how to achieve that in the best possible way. So I'm really grateful for your contribution and comments. Thank you. I don't think we have any more chat comments or hands in the audience. Okay, wait, there is a hello from Global Citizens. They very much support our work towards the new statement at the summit and task force being established by G7 governments. And it's showing a lot of leadership individually and as part of it was part of multilateral efforts, and it should not be difficult for them to coordinate. However, this task force should also serve as a channel for communication with the C7, not just to make it up of governments, but also include this group. And indeed, this is what we are talking about. And then there is another comment from, Michael, if you can scroll down, about security, just that justice security can be used as a weapon against civil society, corruption can be used as a weapon against those who criticize government. So we as Transparency have experience with this, and I suppose this is where your experience came in drafting the Open Society Statement, which brings me nicely to our next topic for discussion, which is why do we need an Open Society Statement, Anna-Maja? Why do we need yet another document?
Thank you, Katarina. And while I'm talking, you might come here to formulate Markus Busch and Sebastian Fiedler, because we will be talking about this. I can make here some introduction. Thank you very much, Katarina, also for your comment, just what you said, and to underline what you said about the current situation when it comes to civil society organizations. you have to have in mind that 2 in 10 people still live in open societies worldwide. 2 in 10. So that's the current situation that we face. And like Ilya said, we don't hear anything from Russia because the whole civil society is silenced. And as the rapporteur said, you might sit here. Yes. Hello. And as the rapporteur said, I think it was very impressive when he was talking that who can alert in a society without a civil society? Who can challenge the current political decisions without civil society? And there is no space. There is no questioning whether or not there is no position. So this is a crucial thing, and we are not asking this for civil society. We are asking this for resilient democracies, for rule of law, and for the whole community worldwide, for each and every one of us, for the business, for the politics, for the civil societies. And that's why we are really, and as Katerina said, what we are trying to do is to focus on these challenges and then to have these, like you said, Katerina, actionable commitments. So how to put that in place, how to be operationalized, these asks, how to move forward. And we realized in our working group Open Societies that we need 3 things. We need to have the space, we need to have the commitments, and we need to have the implementation of the commitments. So the space is exactly what Katarina was just talking about with you and with our experts. But the second thing is we need to have the commitments. And I'm really excited and happy about the fact that we have here today Andrew Preston, who is director of the UK government's Joint Action Corruption Unit. He's working for the Ministry of Internal Affairs and was the, Andrew, if I allow me to say, one of the founding fathers for this Open Society statement, because it was the first time ever last year that the G7 presidency defined this statement, published this statement. And what we are aiming to do is to renew this and to bring some continuity, to be able to put our topic somewhere in the context of G7. So Andrew, please tell us something about the background. Where did you see the need for this Open Society statement, and maybe also what is your perspective towards the future? What would you wish for from the German government, Andrew?
Thank you very much, Anna-Maja, and thank you as well for the opportunity to participate at this event. I think from the UK's perspective, we really welcome this initiative. We think that this is a very important agenda, as I think we've heard from the speakers we've already had. Let me just say a sentence or two just about who I am. So my team led principally on the sort of anti-corruption elements of the G7 last year, and we see open societies as being an absolutely essential part of that. We work very closely with Foreign Office colleagues. My colleague Jackie Peace is on the line participating in this seminar as well. And the foreign and development track, and then the leaders essentially led the Open Society statement. So coming to your questions, why did the UK promote an Open Society statement? I think the first thing to probably say is that I think this is something that our Prime Minister and our Foreign Secretaries have essentially recognised as being very important. And so that political backing for the importance of this agenda is really important. I think it was articulated in the UK undertook something called an integrated review in 2021, which essentially was a strategic framework looking at our sort of foreign policy, defence and development posture in the medium term. And one of the core sort of findings from that integrated review was that essentially that open societies was a vital strand that we needed to promote going forwards, linking into global geopolitics, linking into sort of global competition and our place in the world as well. I think many of the reasons why we thought the statement were important, actually, many of your speakers have already set out really well. Open societies, the concept speaks to a set of values, which in turn link to a sort of ways of life. And we think those ways of life are important. We also think that those ways of life are effectively under threat in the ways that Ilya and others have articulated very clearly already. So the driver for an Open Society statement was very much a driver around politically signaling internationally the importance of this agenda and wanting to sort of promote further action. And as such, we're really pleased that you guys are sort of picking this up and that you are driving it forward, and really welcome that initiative. I guess the other element to mention is that the US Summit for Democracy, which took place in December last year, also has a very similar framing and is another really important stream to progress this agenda in the medium term. We're currently in a year of action. We're going to have a second US Summit for Democracy, probably the first quarter of next year. And we see that as a way of driving international progress on this agenda as well. And the US very much sees civil society as being a part of that S4D agenda. And then just a couple of sentences on sort of events more recently. I mean, I think Ilya and others have articulated the degree to which the Ukraine crisis and the Afghanistan crisis as well have both shown the importance of this agenda and the need for action in relation to it. From our side, our Foreign Secretary gave a speech, I think last week, entitled The Return of Geopolitics, and that again has shown her interest on that. Very much focus around democracies and liberties is her particular interest, but the UK side, we remain really keen on this. A couple of sentences about kind of what was challenging, which was something I think this discussion's touched on already. I had three broad elements. The first one was something about not being too prescriptive. I think open societies is a difficult, is a sort of broad term. I think there is a risk that you get fixated on certain institutional frameworks. And I think there's a need to recognize that different countries do things differently. You need to understand that institutional framework. But at the same time, you need to still focus in on the underlying values and think about whether those values are being delivered in that country, whatever the sort of institutional form that is being driven. So there's something about prescription and institutional structures. Secondly, I would say don't frame this as China or Russia bashing. I think this is a much broader set of challenges that we are facing globally, and we need to think in that global terms. And linked to that, I think there was this expression in England, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, which essentially is saying if you have some problems yourself, don't go and attack other people. And I think we need to approach this agenda as Western democracies, recognizing that actually many of our democratic institutions are under threat at the present time, and that we have problems. I know certainly in the UK there are challenges to our democratic functioning, and we need to be humble and self-aware as we take forward this agenda, recognizing that we ourselves have problems. And thirdly, the third element I had, actually a lot of people have touched on already, which is the balance between openness and national security. I think Rowan talked about this in the UK context. Maria mentioned it, Clement mentioned it as well. I'm recognizing that actually there are risks that sort of national security elements can be misused. So counterterrorism elements can be misused to oppress civil society. I think from my side, from my perspective, I take a more nuanced view on it. I think some of those national security measures can be necessary, but I recognize the risks that the other authors are talking, the other speakers have spoken about. And so I recognize that we need to do that in a very clear and thoughtful and clever way, the kind of that needs consultation and needs a democratic approach. But we need to try and square that tension between openness and national security concerns. Now, coming to your last element, Anna Maya, around sort of looking to the future and the German role, I just had a couple of points to make. Firstly, really just to agree with other speakers that I think the G7 does have a really strong value add in this agenda. It's an agile forum, it's like-minded, it has a lot of political weight internationally. So I'm very, very glad that we're having this conversation this week. On the anti-corruption side, we focused especially on trying to get the G7 to speak as a unified voice on anti-corruption issues, especially in a lot of multilateral fora where these values are under threat and under challenge constantly. Very pleased that Marcus has picked that up and that we are jointly doing that in the G20, in the UN and other forums. And I hope that we continue to progress that element. I mentioned S4D, the Summit for Democracy. I think that is an important channel that we need to keep promoting. And then I want to flag that in addition to the broad open society's agenda, there are often particular work streams that I think matter. So media freedom is one which my Foreign Office colleagues, if they were here in my place, would speak a lot about. I would also focus on dirty money and the issue of beneficial ownership. I think the Russia-Ukraine crisis, as Ilya has said, has really put a spotlight on the fact that Russian oligarchs have used corporate structures to hide their money. And if we don't have beneficial ownership transparency, it's really difficult to show the linkage between the owner of an asset and the actual the use to which those assets are being made. So I believe Sebastian's going to say a few words about that. So really welcome sort of German thinking and progress in relation to that as well. But finally, just to conclude and say, really welcome this initiative, and the UK is strongly supportive of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's really good to hear. So basically, this is the same approach that we were following our working group, because we saw that there are two different levels that we need to be active. We have this very general level, like Helena said, that it would be good to have this united approach of all the civil society actors. So we said, because we had members in our working group coming from the journalists or journalists that attended the meeting, but also in terms of gender or civil children rights on different parts of civil society. And we said it doesn't make any sense to say whether children's rights are more important than press freedom. So we need to have a second level to say that we need to protect the whole civic space. And Andrew just said this very holistic idea, and I very much like what you said. Let's not just talk about singular nations being the problems in this world, but we are part of the problem always, because we are all interconnected. So what is our part and what is our responsibility also in terms of G7? Start in your own country. It's the main reason. But then also to go to the level sort of below this very general level to see what are the very important work streams when you talk about the press freedom, beneficial ownership, and more things like this. And the third one, and then I come to Markus Busch, and I was very glad that you mentioned him already. And I can say that in the first time we were talking to each other, you said, well, you have to contact Markus Busch as well, because he was sort of my counterpart when we were talking about these issues. And this is what we were very much aiming to continuity, but also progress in terms of the G7. Not just every year start all over again. Of course, we know it's also something for your brand, sort of that you want to show something, but you need to have this progress in terms of the commitments as well. So that's why I think it's good that you both are here. That's fantastic. And Markus, you were also saying that you are since several years. Markus Busch is the head of division in combating economic, computer corruption and environmental crime in the German Federal Ministry of Justice. And you are part of these G7 and G20 processes, very long time, several years now. And you see maybe also the whole context, how the decisions are made in this context. Maybe you can open up that as well. Markus.
Yes, thank you very much for your kind words and the invitation to this C7 working group pre-event, which I very gladly accepted, because I think it's a very important and timely issue we are discussing here. So as you said, my responsibilities are anti-corruption policy, including in the G7 context, and that is my angle also on society engagement. And from that perspective, I can say that in the anti-corruption field, civil society engagement was always a priority for the G7. Indeed, it might be even fair to say that the G7 work stream on anti-corruption that started first in 2016, one of the important topics was to highlight and secure the role and impact of civil society in anti-corruption, which might be less self-understood, even questioned or even denied in the G20 context. So for the G7, the idea was always to be a fora, to keep, if you will, the civil society torch alive in times where in a fora like G20, space was shrinking for civil society. That's the niche and the added value for G7 anti-corruption work stream. Of course, over the last years, and especially in the current situation, the need for keeping civil society on the agenda has even become stronger, and also the need for a unified voice by the G7 is more needed than ever. The other question on the decision making and on the impact of civil society work on G7 decisions. So from my perspective, I think where civil society can really have a good impact is on accountability, because experience shows that both G7 and G20 are good at producing each year new principles and commitments. And if I may say, to a certain extent, that C20 might be sometimes tempted to mirror that pace and rhythm. So it would be good from my perspective to have a strong focus, or from civil society to insist on a strong focus on what a country do to implement past commitments. In the anti-corruption area, there are major implementation gaps that do not go unnoticed, but that might not get the attention they should get. Also, I think an impact can be made with analytical work of civil society. Here too, I believe that focus on existing commitments and a critical review of the impact of the implementation might be useful. We had strong commitments on beneficial ownership, for example. They are implemented to a certain extent. We have public beneficial ownership registers in a number of countries, and it might be good maybe to see if the expectations that were linked to these commitments and to beneficial ownership transparency, if they are met by what we have now, and if not, if there's an implementation gap, or if there are other issues to be addressed. So we need there are a lot of commitments in place, and I think the emphasis should be on the implementation. As an outlook, maybe also I believe that the anti-corruption field might be a good leverage for strengthening civil society, because all states have made strong and repeated commitments on anti-corruption and transparency, and that of course includes civil society engagement. It's essential, and I think there might be a way to hold all countries to account by their anti-corruption commitments that always include, at least to a certain extent, also civil society space and engagement. The other thing that I would like to highlight is the risk of instrumentalization, not only of national security issues, but also of anti-corruption policies against civil society. We see that, we've seen it in the past, we see it now. Here, of course, the lesson to be learned would be to be cautious, to keep a sense of proportionality in the demands civil society makes in anti-corruption, to keep in the prosecution area, in the law enforcement area, the necessary safeguards. On the follow-up or on the continuation of the UK's work on civil society, I can say that this is on the agenda of the German G7 presidency as well, and work is on the way to continue the work stream and the commitments made by the UK.
Thank you very much, Mr. Busch. And I just was yesterday talking to the German Sherpa, who cannot unfortunately be here, but they said they have very close connection also to your office. It's good to know. So I suppose you will be delivering our contents also and talking about these topics also with the German Sherpa. That's of course fantastic. And thank you so much also for your remarks in terms of the importance of the implementation. This is what we are just going to talk about in our third part when we talk about the review mechanism. But also, I think we all have the worry that if we have new regulations, how can we avoid that they are abused to even sort of shrink the spaces even more? So I think these are main ideas, and I now I would like to turn further, and this is maybe the connection between Sebastian Fiedler and Markus Busch, both working in the same field, but not in the government like Markus Busch, but Sebastian Fiedler is member of the German Federal Parliament. Also, because I just wrote it down before this meeting, because it is important, this is a new body. He is also chair of the new crime policy body of the parliament. So I think this is important for us to know. He is also former chair of the Association of the Criminal Police Officers and used to be also a member of the board of Transparency International Germany. So I know him also from there. And there are some also, but Andrew Preston said that there are, of course, these conflicts of sort of openness, but also to see that there is no abuse. How can we sort of take both of these? Because, of course, beneficial ownership, transparency is important for you, but still we need to secure the civic space. So maybe you can just tell your perspective as the member of the parliament, and you might know he's also member of the Social Democrats, so has a direct contact to the Chancellor office. So I think you will deliver all the topics that we are talking here directly to Olaf Scholz. That's my expectation. Sebastian.
Yeah. Not really every day, but thank you so much for the invitation and for the nice work. So my task is to give you a very special perspective on the point. So let me just emphasize a few points. As you said, I have more than 20 years of experience as an investigator in the field of white-collar crime and financial crime, in the field of training investigators which have to deal with this crime phenomenons, and also as a chairman of the association, so kind of lobby organization for the criminal detectives, police union. Join me in looking at the issue of money laundering and illicit flows and the role of a strong civil society first. When, how, and why did we come to criminal policy improvements? I have experienced again and again how incredibly important the role of civil society has been in this. A few examples only. First, when the European Union was discussing an anti-money laundering directive more or less 10 years ago, the issue was the introduction of the transparency registers. Maybe you remember that time. Germany and some other member states slowed down the discussion a lot. With the support of committed NGOs such as WEED or Tax Justice Network and press reports, it was possible to make substantial progress. Second, in Germany, the former finance minister Dr. Wolfgang Schäuble wanted to conclude a tax agreement with Switzerland. Dirty money was to be legalized by making anonymous payments. Our criticism was there were countless loopholes, and also the assets of mafiosi and other criminals would have been amnestied. It would have been state-organized money laundering. I publicly threatened the finance minister with criminal charges at that time. Again, it was a committed and loud civil society that helped to prevent the agreement through public pressure. Third, the last example is not a single one, but many. Thanks to courageous whistleblowers and committed journalists, we now know many details about people and entities that have hidden their dirty money in secrecy jurisdictions. We know the modus operandi and the systems. No single international investigation by state authorities has been nearly as successful as the leaks. The most recent publications concerned Credit Suisse and, hot off the press, Dubai. There is one big lesson from all the leaks. The estimated $8 trillion hidden in secrecy jurisdictions come from despots, autocrats who have plundered their peoples, from tax evaders, and of course from the most serious crime, such as drug trafficking, human trafficking, corruption, product piracy, fraud, illegal arms trafficking, or environmental crime, as I learned you're responsible in the ministry. And by the way, did you know that environmental crime is the considered third largest crime phenomenon and is highly relevant for CO2 emissions and is the #1 culprit for biodiversity loss? This money endangers democracies and it determines war and peace. A key strategy to manage the beneficial owners transparent. We are no longer only discussing classic transparency registered, but asset registered that bring together information on real estate, bank accounts, and shareholdings in companies, I want to admit at least. In numerous cases, we do not know who owns real estate. And when I say we, I mean not only the interested public, but also the investigating authorities. This is one of the many problems we have with sanctioned Russian oligarchs right now. And because of that, it's one of my personal priorities right now in the parliament. A strong civil society is crucial in creating transparency and in social debates. It helps to control information, to expose wrongdoing. It helps to make the issues accessible to a broad public. This brings me to my last point. I would like to make a very weighty argument at the end of my short speech. Every government, or specifically every Minister of Interior or Minister of Justice, sets crime strategy priorities. These are strongly influenced by public outrage or fears or concerns. The problems with money laundering, however, is that it's so-called control crime. The more resources are used to uncover money laundering, the more cases are in the statistics. This is a still misconception among the public that no crime figures are indicators for a successful domestic policy. That is true in the case of housebreaking. It's not true in the case of money laundering and financial crime. In order that political inactivity is not rewarded and the danger of illicit flows become more greater and as they already are, we need a strong and courageous civil society. For me, so it's clear that this must be an ongoing issue at G7, and a strong civil society statement would be very, very helpful for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Sebastian. It's very, very good points. And thank you also for sort of reminding us how important part the environmental crime also is. And that's what we just thought we need to stick together. We need more sort of united civil society because also our topics are interlinked. And we, during the last G20 presidency in Germany, this was one of the topics, environmental crime. So we need to have the climate activists and we need to have the corruption activists, anti-corruption activists in order to have the whole sort of issue tackled. And I think it's very important when we talk about what kind of civil society we need. The civil society needs to be free, protected, and critical. As you said, the critical also joining these sort of legislation processes, alerting, challenging, united, and sticking together. Thank you so much. Very, very good points. Are there? Here, sorry, I saw that, and I just wanted to. I saw that this was a comment from Jackie Pease, and I just wanted to thank you, Jackie, also for your efforts in this context, and I'm happy that you can join us. And I tried to read this. I'm not sure whether I can see that, but I try as far as can. Jackie Pease from the UK government, also anti-corruption working unit working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I very much agree with Markus about focus on government's implementation, their commitments, including on beneficial ownership transparency, where there is a lot of political traction at present, and reviewing the impact of implementing those commitments. We need to remain focused on what we try to achieve. I think that's very important also for the German presidency and of course the Japanese presidency in the next year. Then second, Krzysztof Kowalewski says, a question for the German panelists. do you think there would be a value add in recognizing, declaring corruption, dirty money as a threat to national security in Germany, the EU, or the EU, like the current US administration did, in order to institutionally prioritize and strengthen the coordinated focus on combating it? I'm looking at you. And maybe afterwards it's who wishes.
So national security are a bit beyond my responsibilities. So I can't really speak to that. But from what I know on what is going on in terms of enforcing sanction, that is really high on the agenda. There is also work going on to see where there are deficits, what can be done to improve, to identify sanctions assets, and to prosecute sanction violations. So from a perspective of putting it high on the agenda, I think there would be no need for a link to national security, because it's really a top priority.
Thank you, Marcus.
Yes, but with many implementation deficits also in Germany. This begins with the transparency register. There are many loopholes as well. The control of the information in the register is a problem right now. So this is also a problem for the investigating authorities. But of course, dirty money. We're talking about more or less 1 billion euros, which are probably laundered every year. This is one of the studies we have. From Professor Bussmann, he told us that. And the amount of money that the investigating authorities see are less than 1% of this amount. So as you see, this is a problem, and this is, of course, a problem for our democracy, because it's a danger for our economic, it's a danger of our democracy as well, because the amount and the danger of the parts of the organized crime, which we have to deal also here in Germany, but let me make that bigger here in Europe. We know a lot about that from the EncroChat files and other files. We are talking about weapons of war and something like that, torture, murderers and something like that. This is dangerous, and it has a direct connection to the amount of money that is made from this criminality.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sebastian. I don't see any further comments. Ravi, could you just come here? Then we have your microphone and also a picture. Just maybe here. No, I stand up. Ravi. it's the easiest way.
Thank you very much. The original question here was the statement of the civil society. I believe G7 and C7 are most powerful groups at the moment in the world. G20 is quite divided. And G7 comprises of countries that have tremendous influence on developing nations too. And we're seeing that civic space around the world in the developing countries is also shrinking. So this is the opportunity for all of us here in the room and the working group to influence G7 to have a bearing on the governments that are working against the civil society. You see in countries in Eastern Europe, Hungary, Poland, the civil society has shrunk. Journalists are being assaulted. Media is not being allowed to write. There's total state capture. To deal with this, this group can play a very critical role. And the statement has to focus on putting pressure on other countries beyond G7, because G7 itself is quite coherent, quite cohesive, but it can influence a lot, many countries around the world in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, because G7 is also a group of donors who have considerable leverage on others. That's what I would like to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi. I've been changed. Thank you so much, Ravi. That's a good point. And I just wanted to remind you, because you just mentioned that we have these two documents that we generated in our working group. First of all, we have part of the communique that we are asking these three things, civil society task force or the renewed open society statement and the implementation. But there is also a paper that we called a draft open society statement, because we do have ideas how it could look like. The paper open society statement that the German G7 presidency and all the G7 countries agrees upon. So it's published already, so it's there, and we will address this topic also during the summit that starts at 1 today. So it's a free access, it's an open event. So feel free to join us. We would be very happy about that. We will be talking about that, by the way, also after the summit, because the G7 summit will take place in June. And until then, we are trying to urge for this statement. Okay, I don't see any further questions. Thank you so much, the panelists so far. And then we come to the third part. Thank you. And the third part is the implementation and accountability, as Markus Busch put it. We need to take care about the implementation accountability. I very much would like to welcome here Aidan Harris. Aidan Harris is Senior Advocacy Coordinator from Open Government Partnership. We change. I come here, you can hear in the middle. And he is member of our working group. So he is representing the topics of our working groups and the asks that we are asking at the moment. Then we have, and maybe you, Sebastian, you could come as well, Sebastian Hasselbeck, who is representing the G7 German presidency government, so the German government. And then we have Oliver Rack, who I see already digitally. Hey, Oliver, it's good to have you here. And I will leave Aidan to lead this discussion. Aidan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be asked to be part of this working group on open societies in this session. So now we're talking about implementation. We've already heard about an implementation deficit, and I can see in the chat people bringing up how we make implementation real. And we heard from our colleague from Bond that one of the perhaps gaps from the Carbus Bay communique is this question about how we make implementation real, because we need this G7 to put these commitments into the communique, but then what happens to them afterwards? There is not that sense of continuity that we really need. And so this is where one of the asks of the working group is we have to have more structured implementation and continuity between the G7 summits, and this is where OGP can come in. So to briefly introduce, so what is OGP? Well, it's not a civil society organization. As the name suggests, it's a partnership. It's governments and it's civil society working together, and it really offers a pathway. So the pathway starts with co-creation. You have government and civil society sitting down, working together about what is needed, the types of reform that are appropriate for that context. And then it goes into national action plans. And this is the program for delivery of what we've heard so far. How are they going to make it real? And then after that, OGP has this framework for independent monitoring of the results, of the data, what works, what gaps there are. So there's a real life cycle of making the implementation real. So the OGP has 77 members. 6 of the G7 are members of OGP, all except Japan. 2 of those are founding members, the UK, the USA. Italy is a co-chair this year, co-chair of our steering committee. Germany also sits on the steering committee. So there's a built-in mechanism that all of the G7 except one can use to actually implement the commitments that were made. We're going to hear how that works in practice from our colleagues from Sebastian and from Oliver in the German context. We've also heard about the Summit for Democracies. There will be more calls for implementation coming from that. There's more calls from the G20. There's this mechanism that we can all use. It's ready to go. It's built in. We don't need to recreate it. And that's something that we would like to see the G7 really take seriously in the communique that we have on open societies.
Thank you so much for your opening remarks and for the position of the working group. Sebastian, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I can neatly pick up on what Aidan said. So Germany joined the Open Government Partnership in 2016. As Aidan said, at the core of the partnership is a mechanism that revolves around the action plans. So action plans are co-created. They consist of commitments with concrete actions on making government more open, and they're co-created with civil society. Now, the neat part about the OGP is the reporting mechanisms that are built in. So it's not just the government's reporting on the progress, but it's also the independent review mechanism of the OGP, looking into how governments are doing, both in co-creating the action plans, but also in implementing the action plans. They look at the degree of ambition of how transformative these actions are and how well governments are co-creating the action plan, which is something that governments regularly struggle with and are definitely not perfect at. So this reporting mechanism creates a mechanism that leads to very concrete action. So this is a mechanism, as Aidan said, that is able to translate political commitment to actual reform. As for Germany, we have published a third action plan already, since this is a cyclical process. So there's action plans every 2 years. Our third one is of summer last year, and we're currently implementing it. The reporting mechanism can also involve a public monitoring, as we have, so we can go on the website and see how far our commitments are implemented. Now, we have in this third action plan already picked up on some of the G7 themes of the last presidency, some of the themes that have been spearheaded by our colleagues in the UK. As has been said, for example, procurement transparency is a commitment in our third action plan. So these synergies between, as Aidan said, between a mechanism like the OGP and a process such as the G7 can certainly be improved. And that's why we're sitting here. That's why we're having this discussion. And using the OGP as a possible mechanism to operationalize these high-level political commitments is something that we need to look into and that we want to achieve, because it's all about synergy. It's not about creating parallel processes. It's about thinking, how can one mechanism help us in enforcing the other's impact. I also want to add a little bit of expectation management, however. It's not easy and is usually hard for governments to follow up with an OGP action plan right after a G7 summit, for example. The OGP process follows its own rules and its own timelines. So sometimes this can work really well. Sometimes it's way harder. And also, of course, the open government discourse is not a 100% match with the open societies discussion, but there's a huge overlap, and I think there's a lot where these two processes can support each other. So in summary, I think we should have this conversation where we take what works in OGP and what can we learn from the mechanisms in OGP. So either the OGP is a mechanism that we use to implement G7 priorities, or there are aspects of the OGP process that can inform other solutions. So I think, yeah, thanks for inviting me. And this is something that we clearly support. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sebastian. So if I understood correctly, it could even be embedded in the OGP, sort of, because the commitments that we see, and I think the strength of the OGP process are the action plans, because it translates the commitments into national context, and the governments are able to choose sort of how to proceed and what commitments come first and what then. Is this correct?
Well, the action plans are a product of co-creation with civil society, for one, and out of the many parameters that can help a government to pass an action plan at a given point in time, of course, the priorities set in a G7 process are one of the parameters that can inform such an action plan. So if all the puzzle pieces fall into place, then a government could be in a good position to use a G7 priority and co-create a commitment for an OGP action plan together with civil society. But as I said, it's not always easy. Timing is one factor, and there are many other factors that come into play, from budgets to political mandates and so forth.
Sure.
But in theory, that is a possibility.
Thank you so much. And this is something I would love to throw to Markus Busch, but don't worry, not yet. But I will, because this is important. You are talking about accountability, and here is a possible mechanism for to be accountable and to take the government into account. So we will connect on that. But maybe Oliver Rack, because you are representing the civil society in this context, and I think this is a wonderful also example to show, so what are the strengths to challenge and to open and to be critical on the side of this governmental process. You have been part of this process quite a while already now. So what is your perspective? What does function well, and also maybe challenging, not challenging Sebastian maybe, but you can do that as well. But so what is your perspective to cope with this? What are the strengths and weaknesses, and what would you propose for us in these topics to implement?
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for having me. Yes, we have to step a little bit back, because all this change in the way we can monitor and have accountability has a lot to do also with technology and with the way society is networked. So this is what technology allows us to better co-create, to better have a monitor to monitor compliance, and to have a holistic access on information across the level, also across the federal levels. So this is one of the challenges still to how can we use this opportunity, these chances, as much as possible to have an open society. So this mechanism, which is like a spiral loop of learning and accountability, and which takes place in a co-creation process and has its evaluation points, it just can be picked up. So when it comes to challenges, it's like this mechanism, to operate this mechanism, it needs resources and skills on both sides, on civil society and also on the gov side. There's needs enough capacity. Also, everything you measure and report builds bureaucracy. So how can technology also help to soften bureaucracy in such processes, which are important, the processes, but how can we facilitate it? This is also a challenge to solve. I think it's a lot of user experience and in technology that couldn't help there. And when it comes to the benefits, it's like the pre-qualification of a process design is very important for having accountability and to ensure the learnings, and also to have evidence-based behavior in this. So this is what AIDEN offers as a pathway. And the next thing is the ongoing nature of the OGP mechanism. So it's ongoing, and when there's some derailing somehow, you can identify it much earlier. And so the co-creation reporting in this ongoing nature also is this momentum which builds the trust in the engine room level between civil society and the governments. It protects the engine room operators against the political lip service and cosmetics often made by politics, and also the self-commitment takes in account the specific needs of those in the engine rooms working, and also it unfolds the multi-stakeholder potentials, e.g. in better regulation. You see that OECD is sometimes criticizing the regulation process in Germany, which could be better in the multi-stakeholder situation. And so to have this co-created situation is also unfolding the multi-stakeholder potentials. And you have a database coming out of such a mechanism. It's like on the OGP, it's the independent reporting mechanism database. It's the OGP Explorer, now changed a little bit, and it allows the profiling of the participants, if it's a nation or also if it's a local. It allows also to have a public oversight of these activities, which gives us the possibility to have a little bit like a fame and blame game as motivation. And it has this little bit of competition between practitioners, and this makes it like, yeah, this is the compliant momentum in it, and it allows the research and the learning out of this database for the participants, but also for the IRM research for the designs. So we had a refresh in 2021 in the reporting mechanism. So this develops too. What I want to point out is Andrew Preston said, we have to protect openness against national security excuses, now coming maybe more because of war times. And a way could be to trickle down open societies to the local level. So the one thing is, so we have in Germany a federal states, and to have instruments for openness, for transparency, accountability, and participation is also a challenge to have it on all levels in a minimal operating standards, but also the federalism has its good side. So when we this minimal operational standards for openness in moving times where maybe openness can be affected by national security excuses, it's better to have them also distributed, you know. So I want to point out that it's very important to think transparency and openness also on all levels, especially on the local levels, which is the live level where life happens. And so there are also hijackers of public interests on the local level, and also in a changing architectures of power in the world happening, it's very important that the local level is fit and is fit for international cooperation with other locals. So is another network securing the national networks, and maybe for securing these national networks, to have trust between these local actors, it's very important to have their minimal standards for openness. And this is, yeah, maybe like you can go to the database and see what is Madrid doing, or what is a town in Ukraine or in Russia doing, what are their processes and what are their efforts in open government. So OGP has just begun to build up a partnership with the United Cities for Local Government, the UCLG. This can also in perspective be a network where we get this trickle down from the national OGP mechanisms to local OGP mechanisms. OGP Local is a program by OGP, but now there should be also a better distributor by the United Cities for local government. In general, so as said before, even the gold standard democracies have their problems. Like in Germany, it's like really some large-scale fails, like the Dieselgate or the Cum-Ex gate, or now the German gas gate, which shows that there's a too strong monopoly to Russian gas, and offshoring gas storage has been shut down, and stuff like this. These are complex interdependencies which can be identified by technology. So it's very important to power up civil society in these technologies and to have access to the information to find also in over complexities the fails of political decisions. So, okay, that's all about how mechanisms works and should be rolled out. The details in the mechanisms, there's so much resources at the OGP to see how the mechanism works. What are the points of evaluation and stuff like that? The products and how is the learning built can be found on the OGP's page.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Very interesting. And I take 2 points that you made. The first, it will take some resources. And you have that in some part of the OGP already there, but you need to have this, you need to have the money, of course, but you need to have the people and the level of the digitalization. So you need to have the technique, but it could be also a chance to boost the digitalization, even in Germany, just to show that what can empower this. So sure, and I think this is a good argument to combine these both. So not to have two independent similar processes there, but to combine these both. And the second is, and I think this is very important, because what we say to the G7 leaders as well is to use us as a gateway to the people, because the civil society is really the intermediator as well. So you need us, you need to have the access to the people, to the citizens. So I think this is important. And in federal states like Germany, you need to go to the local level. So it needs to make sense for the people there living in these local levels and having access to seeing the profits out of these open society solutions. So I think that is very important. And I think Angela Reitmeier put one question to this, and then I maybe hand over to Catherine or later. Angela was asking, would OGP be a good mechanism to translate commitments into action in countries like Germany, where not just the federal government needs to commit and implement, but also the lender? Do you have any comments on that?
I would say yes, and we are working on including the lender and the municipalities in our action plan. So not just the current action plan, but also the previous action plan has commitments by the lender. And our current action plan includes commitments where both the federal and the lender level together are responsible for implementation. I believe even the commitment on public procurement. These are projects, when they're IT related, come out of the IT Planning Council, which is a body of the federal and the lender government. So yes, obviously the amount of coordination and agreement that has to go into a commitment that involves several levels is a bit higher. Mm-hmm. That's why I said earlier the OGP process has some rules and timelines. So sometimes we don't manage to put commitments into action plans simply for the reason that at the point where we have to deliver an action plan, a commitment was not ready for a decision. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that these things don't happen, they're just not in the action plan.
Yeah, but I think this would be a possibility for us, because we still have 14 minutes to go, but still we should think about the follow-up, what happens next. And I think what we are trying to do from the working group is to push for these 3 asks, also the open society statement. And once it's there, this is our wishful thinking, we need to talk about implementation. And that's where we would come to you, Sebastian, to your office, but also Markus Busch, and saying, sozusagen, here is a way to review the implementation and put that together. And because I do believe that we have a common understanding how to proceed, but the details we need to talk still. But this would be one possible proceeding, in my understanding. Okay, there are some further questions, and please make yourself visible if you would like to raise the hand. There are the last possibilities. Duncan from UK, in our experience of accountability for London Anti-Corruption Summit commitments, a key learning was the importance of both concrete and ambitious commitments. It would represent a big step forward for G7 statements to include more concrete commitments, and it will also be hard for these to translate into OGP national action plans otherwise. So yeah, I think, and these are our I think our asks are very concrete, what we have in place. I hope that the government is as concrete as well. Okay, and the second, yes. Who is this?
No, Oliver.
Ah, Oliver, sorry.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, this is a advantage of the co-creation that nails things down and makes them concrete and makes them expectable. So this is very important to take into account. And when it comes to the local, the very local level, the regional and the municipal level, I think that's the challenge of who is doing the IRM then. You know, is it the civil society mostly not having enough capacities? And I often advise the municipal level just now before applying for the OGP local to take the universities within the game, you know. So when people working scientific is like quite objective if you want to work in a scientific way. So it would be very good to take the universities, the high schools in Germany, and use them for the local reporting.
Thank you, Oliver. Very good point. Aidan.
Just to come in, so we've already talked about OGP Local. The OGP Local has nearly as many members now as national governments. So that can be cities. You have Los Angeles, Mexico City, also subnational units, Scotland, the Basque Country. They are members in their own right of OGP Local. And so that is where, you know, it's closer to citizens, it's closer to service delivery, and you can really achieve more participation and more integration with the national level action plans. Just on the point of co-creation, it's also worth saying it's not just at the creation moment where the inclusion of civil society happens. It can happen through the implementation moments as well. So it continues. It's not just the, you know, once every 4 years they sit down and have a meeting and that's it. It's about civil society and government working together on how implementation is going. What is the best way to implement to avoid gaps going forward? And just, yeah, I'm interested in Duncan's experience in the Anti-Corruption Summit. I think we see this in many other global moments. We've heard about the S4D, Summit for Democracies, coming up, where a lot of the pledges, or some of the pledges from last year's summit, were not concrete and ambitious. And we're now in a year of action trying to make them more specific, more concrete and ambitious for the next summit next year. And again, that's a role that OGP can play. We're planning to be very involved in a cohort of countries on fiscal transparency. So we've heard about beneficial ownership and asset freezing, asset seizure, and the enabling environment about you know, the legal system that supports dirty money, which is fueling conflict and so on. And that's where we want to be working with our cohort of OGP countries to make those commitments at the Summit for Democracy more specific, more concrete and ambitious, so we can come back to the summit next year with specific things to say that are also in OGP action plans.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear, because these are also the resources that we can use and your knowledge in terms of the implementation of our asks. Thank you so much. Any further questions or comments? Last minute.
Do you still hear
Oliver.
me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The co-creation in implementation is a space or a part we also must get better in Germany. But it's very hard to get the responsibilities, the functional units in the organizations to get there. And also for the civil society, it's hard because the capacities, it's much more effort to do the implementation co-creation than the design of the action plans. So yeah, it's the society has to ask itself how much we want to support this by resources. This is the bottom line on it, you know. It's like with culture, you know. to support culture is to develop culture in having in layouting in arts the point of view on society issues, but also to get those things concrete is really a value for societies, and it needs its resources by the public money.
Thank you so much. And also, of course, the security, the interaction within the society when you talk about the top down and what Chair is always talking about. So it's a very crucial thing to do. Thank you so much. I would say we will gather on it, and I do feel supported in this group and so far in this whole multi-stakeholder dialogue that we are implementing also here, and that we are going to continue to implement not only until the G7 summit, but also afterwards in Japanese and all over the years that are still to come, supported to have for our three asks that need to have the space, we need to have the commitments, and we need to have the implementation. And I think this is the main thing that we will take to our C7 summit now, today and tomorrow. And I'm happy if you are having interaction with the German Sherpa or the Japanese Sherpa, that you deliver also our asks there and say that it's urgent. Again, 2 in 10 people still live in open societies, and this urges us for action.
Yeah, Bill, thank you. No, thank you, Anna-Maja, very much. And I want to thank you all here today in the room and online on behalf of the European Center for Nonprofit Law for joining us. And I would like to thank very much Transparency International Germany and International Secretariat for working with us on this. It has been an amazing journey to work together also with you, but also with the working group members coming from different backgrounds, dedicating many hours to think about what is it that we want to ask. And I think I hope many of them are online, but I think we would all feel encouraged by some of the comments that were said by Andrew and Mr. Bush and all the others about the importance of the issues we are discussing and taking them forward. When we were working on our asks, when we were tasked to develop our asks, we came with many of them. And I think we realized that the only way we can consolidate them is if we make them the asks of everybody who is affected by them, the government, the banks, the people and that are living through the issues that we are experiencing, and the industries that affect how we operate. And I think this is why we said, look, we can have an open society statement, but it will always be looked as civil society asking for that. But what we want is to have an open society statement where we together with the government and the others ask for that. And we actually think what is our priority, and then we think how can we make it happen. And this is really what drives us behind these 3 asks, to look at very concrete demands, as many of you have said before during the discussions, to sit together and then to work through that, to see what's realistic, how can we bring the OGP with the G7, and how can we bring them also in a harmony together, and with the OECD and with the other processes. I think it's very important what Andrew Preston said, that the only way we can do this if we are going through a dialogue where we focus on the values that we like to be nurtured, because the specifics will come in the country context. And again, can only be achieved if we sit together on the table and we do it as a community. And so I hope that we are encouraged to hear the positive feedback we received today and some of the suggestions of how to think further. But I truly hope and thank the government officials and parliament officials in this room with us today. And I truly hope we can help us think forward and help us reach our goals. And we can achieve what we can achieve in Germany, but also later with Japan and the other governments and at home. So I thank you so much for making this experience really valuable, and we look forward to working together again.
And I thank you, Katharina, for the hard work, for the creativity and expertise that you have delivered in this process and your organization. Thank you so much. And stay tuned, we will. So the process will go on, and let's stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.